Amazing. All right, so hi there. My name is Nikita Sethi, and today I'll be presenting my project entitled The Lived Experiences of Low-Income Students Who Are Attending Boston University. This project was completed on the Kilachand Keystone pathway, and I was advised by Dr. Taylor Payton in the School of Hospitality Administration. So according to a 2019 study from the Pew Research Center, the percentage of low-income students attending selective universities has increased by about 5% in the past 20 years. And that increase is the direct result of outreach programs like Affordable BU, which is pictured here, that make it more accessible for low-income students to start attending these more elite universities. And that percentage is only continuing to rise. So I set out to study how a student's status as low income affects their lived experience as they are attending one of these elite universities. And how I did this is I conducted a qualitative study at Boston University with low-income students. I used a semi-structured interview process and investigated a student's adjustment to college, prioritization of responsibilities, family relationships, and systems of social support. And I did this through Zoom interviews that averaged about 30 to 60 minutes apiece. All in all, I ended up speaking with 12 students of varying class years, gender identities, and racial and ethnic backgrounds, as well as like geographic backgrounds, like where they're originally from. The one trait that these students all shared was that they self-identified as a low-income student. And to get the participants for this study, I used snowball sampling. So snowball sampling is where you start with like an initial, pool of people. And I found those through my own network of low-income students at BU. And then you have those students refer other students that you think would be good participants for the study. And this kind of sampling is often used for projects that cover more sensitive topics, which obviously financial status is one of those topics. So when coding these interviews, I was able to group shared experiences between low-income students into 4 different categories, and they are academic isolation, social isolation, barriers, and resources, and the barriers that are unique to being low-income. So we'll start with academic isolation, and to contextualize this theme, we'll begin with a quote from a student that was taken from my interview transcripts.
I was taking Chemistry 101 my first semester of college, and in high school, I wouldn't say I got a real chemistry education at all. My teacher couldn't control the class and just decided not to, and kind of left us to fend for ourselves. And it was the same in physics, and you kind of need both for chemistry. So when I entered college, there were a lot of assumptions about what I already knew from high school, even being at the introductory level of chemistry. So I tried to do some light studying ahead in preparation for my college chem class, but it was just so different.
So what this student is touching on in this clip is something that unfortunately a lot of low-income students face when they come to an elite university, especially if they attended a public high school where they're coming from. They're entering an extremely different academic environment than the one of their high school when they get to college. And the academic environments that these students are usually come from don't use terms like office hours, teaching assistants, or sometimes even syllabus. So entering the university system with all of this jargon flying around is really confusing. Of the 12 students that I interviewed, almost all of them reported that they either have still never gone to office hours or it took them a couple of semesters to get used to the idea of going to office hours. So take the student from the clip that we just heard. They're already behind in Chem 101, which if you don't know is a notoriously difficult class because their high school didn't give them the prerequisite knowledge that they needed for chemistry. They don't know what an office hour or a teaching assistant is, and they've never had access to resources like the tutoring offered by the Educational Resources Center here at BU. So what the student did is took all of the weight of catching themselves up in chemistry onto their back, and it ended up in them feeling really behind. And this kind of experience isn't uncommon among low-income students. And you might be thinking, well, hey, there are resources offered by the university, so why didn't that student just, use them? And I want to touch on the fact that there's an identity shift that happens for these students when they enter an elite university. And because most of these students have fought into this elite university on merit alone, and they've done it without the help of resources like the ones that are offered on a university campus. And it can take a student anywhere between a few weeks to like the first 2 years of their college experience to make that shift and realize that their status as low income is going to affect other areas of their life, such as their academics, and that they're going to need to seek out resources to help compensate for those effects. The next theme I want to present about the lived experiences of low-income students is social isolation, and we will again begin with a brief quote.
It's hard when you would go out with friends and they're like getting stuff, buying stuff, and I would be like, okay, if I want to buy this, I need to pick up a shift to be able to pay for that. Let me just do the math real quick. Let me check my bank account. I don't really know if that check is going to clear.
So what this student is saying in a rather lighthearted tone is touching on what one of my interview participants called pay-to-play friendships, which is a very apt description, I think. So low-income students often encounter social situations at elite universities that require money, whether it be shopping like the student was talking about, going out to dinner, attending a concert, or going away for the weekend. And because low-income students can't pay to do these activities, money acts as a barrier between the low-income students and their wealthier peers. Because what will often happen is that the low-income student will make up an excuse that's unrelated to money to avoid the embarrassment of having to come out and say, hey, I can't afford this right now. Can we go for a walk? Like it takes a lot to say something like that. And there's something unique here about being a low-income student, specifically on an elite university campus, because not doing these activities that require money would be completely fine if these low-income students weren't constantly surrounded by people who are doing them so casually. And so what you get are misunderstandings on both sides of the line. So wealthier students are confused why their low-income students are bailing out of social activities, and they might think that they're flaky. And low-income students are just trying to navigate the reality that their financial status is dictating the kind of social circles that they're able to comfortably participate in. Which brings us to the barriers that are unique to being low-income on an elite university campus. Now, unlike academic and social isolation, which are brought about by having relatively less knowledge about money or the academic environment than your peers, the barriers that I'm talking about on this slide stand in the way of basic necessities like food, sleep, and shelter. The first of which being working a job while attending classes. Now, working while attending college is kind of expected of low-income students, so it's easy to forget that 10 to 20 hours of working per week and often working service jobs that are physically exhausting, it can be really, it can be very taxing, and it can take away precious mental energy from the rigorous academic schedule of an elite university student. And on top of working, low-income students are constantly balancing financial obligations with the rest of their responsibilities. So they might turn down a class because the required textbook is too expensive, or be picking up extra shifts at work just to ensure that they're able to afford a plane ticket home, lest they be stranded in their university town when the dorms close for winter break. And some of these realities are just part of the bag of being low income, but it's important to remember that these things add an extra layer of mental exhaustion for low-income students that are trying to excel in their classes, figure out how to network, or just be able to breathe on a tight budget. Which brings us to the last topic for this presentation, which is resources for low-income students that are available or need to be available on university campuses. And I would like to acknowledge that sometimes, approaching this issue can seem a little bit too nebulous and overwhelming, but there are concrete things that can be done to lessen the strain of the lived experiences of these students. So to aid in the academic isolation felt by low-income students, professors and faculty can define terms such as office hours or other academic jargon in their syllabi. Additionally, one of my interview participants noted that one of their professors reached out to them and asked, who here is low income? And having that open dialogue with a professor about what you might be going through outside of class really changed that student's experience in that class. So professors can do things like that. Boston University has also recently opened the Newbery Center, which is dedicated to connecting first-generation students to resources on campus, as well as building community for these students. And now it's dangerous to rely only on this, but there is a great intersectionality between low-income and first-generation identities, and the center promises to take steps forward in bridging the socioeconomic gap on BU's campus. And I had the opportunity to speak with Maria Dykema-Erb, who's the director of the Newbery Center, and she spoke to the goals of this community.
The whole goal is that our first-gen students and low-income students have just as much of an opportunity to thrive at Boston University as those students who might come from more privileged backgrounds or might be continuing generation students, but that we provide the resources for students to be able to thrive and also to have a positive experience at BU. We don't want you to just get through, but rather we want you to thrive.
And the last resource that I will mention to improve the low-income experience is the deliverable for this project, which is a 4-episode podcast entitled The Not So Golden Ticket. So each episode is approximately 15 to 20 minutes long, and the episodes cover the themes that I covered in this presentation, which are academic isolation, social isolation, barriers, and resources. Currently, the first 2 episodes are out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and I encourage you to listen to them if you are interested in learning more about this topic, because I delve much deeper there than I did here. Thank you for listening, and I would also like to thank the people that are listed on this slide for the contributions to the success of this project. I would not have been able to do this without you. And I will now take any questions you might have.